The phone call was, Cameron, you need to come to the hospital immediately. So I'm into the renal ward. Within half an hour of being in the renal ward, I've got a central line in my chest, and then I'm straight into the renal unit, hooked up to a dialysis machine. If you'd asked me an hour and a half before that what a dialysis machine and what dialysis looked like and what it was, I couldn't have told you. I crash landed into dialysis, which was an understatement.
That moment you just heard was the afternoon everything changed. In today's episode, Cam walks us through his extraordinary journey from what started as a routine ear infection to an emergency diagnosis to crash landing into dialysis with absolutely no warning and no preparation whatsoever. And what he chose to do next? Well, that's where this story becomes remarkable. I'm your host, Dee Moore. This is Diary of a Kidney Warrior podcast, and this is Cam's story.
Diary of a Kidney Warrior podcast, in partnership with Kidney Care UK, sharing faith, knowledge, hope, and love.
Hi, and welcome to Diary of a Kidney Warrior podcast. How are you doing today, Cam?
Very good, thanks, Dee. Hope you're well too, and thanks for having me.
You're very welcome, and it's really great to have you on the podcast today. I'm always excited to record Kidney Warrior stories, and I always say that I love recording Kidney Warrior story interviews because it is so powerful to learn from someone's lived experience with CKD. And today is extra special because I don't want to give too much away before we start the interview, but I know you have record-breaking aims that we're going to be talking about today. So I'm doubly excited to hear your story and your journey with CKD. So I'm going to start with my first question. And my first question is, how did your Kidney Warrior journey begin and how were you diagnosed?
Yeah, so it's a slightly odd way to start, I suppose, with a kidney story. But my Kidney Warrior journey began with an ear infection, or what was appearing to be an ear infection, in, I suppose, the autumn of 2024. So at the time, we didn't put anything to it. That we had young kids, and it was that time of year when there was the sinusy, snotty colds going around. So we just put it down to that. Other people had similar, but it didn't clear up, basically. And I was in and out of the GP, being treated for an ear infection. Things got worse. And then I ended up with a facial paralysis. It's kind of half my face dropped, basically. So at that point, I went to A&E. They ran some tests, CRP through the roof. Again, discharged, and things were going on with me that wasn't right. So I basically got progressively worse after that. I'd been referred privately to a ENT specialist, but almost around a year to the day, I ended up in A&E, not being able to walk. I've gone deaf in my left ear at this point. I've got bloodshot eyes. My lungs are bad. So like a real multi-system attack on my body, basically. None of the doctors knew what it was. I was being jumped from one doctor to another. And then finally someone said, right, let's do a full suite of blood work. And what came back, it's like a blessing and a curse what came back, really, because it's a blessing in the sense they found out. But the curse was that I was diagnosed with a condition known as vasculitis, which is a pretty rare autoimmune condition that's essentially inflammation of the small blood vessels in your body.
Before we go any further, just a quick reminder. Everything we share on this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only. It is not medical advice. Always speak with your own healthcare team about your individual situation and your health. To go through all of that must have been so frightening and confusing for yourself. what were you thinking at that time? I mean, when your face, you suffered the facial paralysis, did they think that you had a stroke at first? Or what were they thinking at that time?
Yeah, well, I called 111, who put me onto the GP, and they were worried I was having a stroke. So that's why I ended up in A&E. I mean, I'm always quite a glass half full type of guy. So, I mean, I'm young, I'm fit at this point in my life. Like, so I'm just like, I know people that have had Bell's palsy. So I'm just putting it down to something like that. I'm like, oh, I'll get the steroids in me and, I'll be better type thing because I always shake everything off. So that wasn't overly alarming. I guess it was a relief in a way to have the diagnosis because I was so poorly, I didn't know what was happening to me. So getting the diagnosis to an extent was, something that can be treated was a bit of a relief. But obviously we'll come on to all the other bits, I'm sure. But, stuff was happening as well that was quite frightening.
So, having the diagnosis of vasculitis at this point, was there any concerns around your kidneys? Did they check your kidneys, or were your kidneys still okay?
Yeah, so the kidneys, when I had the facial palsy, which is about January 2025, were functioning perfectly normally. Then when I went in for a second time, like I explained earlier, when I was really ill, they did, like, as part of the blood tests, the normal kidney tests. So they did test my GFR. When I was first admitted to hospital, my GFR just dipped below 60. So not a disaster at this point. But they thought that's unusual. So I'm not admitted to the renal unit at this point. I'm still just in general medicine. But over a week, my GFR dropped from 60 to 20. So at that point, they were like, this is relatively serious. Like, your kidneys are clearly being attacked. And one of the the annoying thing about vasculitis, should we say, is that because your kidneys are made up of a number of small blood vessels, I had a very aggressive attack on my body. So it really aggressively attacked my kidneys. Hence the kind of rapid drop from 60 to 20. So it all, that was happening quite quickly. And that's scary at this point.
So at this point, did they explain to you the potential impact on your kidneys long term, or did they think that the medication they were giving you would treat the condition and your kidneys would be fine?
Yeah, I mean, so typically where there's sort of kidney involvement with vasculitis, you treat the vasculitis initially with steroids, and then you treat it with immunosuppressant drugs. So in my case was rituximab, cyclophosphamide, and now Avacopan. I was on such a high dose of steroids, it keeps certain cancers at bay. Yeah, the vasculitis in my case was, proving to be quite robust against the treatment. At this point, though, they're still of the view that I am going to recover. So we're not talking about kidney failure. We're not talking about anything else. All we're focused on is get the vasculitis under control. Then the inflammation will go down in your body and then you'll feel better. But it was severe. Like, my CRP score at this point is over 300. A normal CRP score is under 5. So, and if you're ill with a cold or something, it might be like 10. So, I'm really, really unwell. It's not funny, really, but
no, I mean, not at all. I mean, to be so seriously ill and have so much to deal with in such a short space of time, what was going through your mind? I mean, how were you coping with everything that was happening?
It's a good question. I think I'm still coping with it, to be honest. I'm not sure I have fully kind of dealt with all the demons that are associated with getting so ill and going through it. But I mean, in quite a blunt way, I mean, at the time, I'm literally fighting for my life. So I was just thinking about, knocking over the next domino. So, all that's occupying my headspace is, what is my GFR result going to be tomorrow? And then whatever it is tomorrow, we just react from there. So, I mean, we literally at this point, we're taking a day. I say we because obviously my wife's heavily involved. Like, she's there, my sister's there. So we're literally just we're jumping from one test result to the next. And there's not much bandwidth to think about anything apart from that, really. I mean, you're thrown into like almost warfare in a way. And the warfare is you fighting to stay alive. And I know that sounds quite extreme and it's quite difficult to listen to, or it's quite difficult to say, but looking back, that is the reality.
This is why I embrace the term kidney warrior, because truly it is a battle. We are fighting for our life. And like you said, when you're in that moment, all you can think about is getting through this, living, fighting for your life. What's my EGFR? So in terms of your EGFR, when did your EGFR then decline?
So as I said, in my first kind of stay at hospital, it dropped from like 60 to 20. And then I was discharged at that point because they've hit me with so many steroids. They thought, well, this has got to work. So I then had another blood test a week after being discharged, and then it's dropped to 13. And then I had another blood test a week later. And while I'm out of hospital, man, I feel terrible. Like, I can't get up in the morning. I'm really trying like to go on walks with the dog, but I mean, I'm doing it. You'll start. Well, we'll talk about the other thing in a minute, and you'll realize the determination in me. But I'm going out walking the dog in the morning, but I feel awful, and I'm like thinking a result in the day is not having a nap. And then a week later, after that, my GFR's at 13. A week later, another blood test. I get like an emergency call from the hospital, like, you need to come in immediately because my GFRs at this point is dropped to 6. So the treatment, although it worked on a lot of the other systems, I can walk and my eyes are better and I can breathe. It is the kidneys are not reacting. They're in a bad way at this point.
So at this point, then, did they start to talk to you about starting dialysis?
Yes, there was never a discussion about starting dialysis. That had never been like, I'd never sat down and considered it. The phone call was, Cameron, you need to come to the hospital immediately. So I'm into the renal ward. Within half an hour of being in the renal ward, I've got a central line in my chest. And then 20 minutes later, I'm in an X-ray room to check it's in the right place. And then I'm straight into the renal unit, hooked up to a dialysis machine. If you'd asked me an hour and a half before that what a dialysis machine and what dialysis looked like and what it was, I couldn't have told you. So I think the phrase that has been used with me before is I crash landed into dialysis, which was an understatement. So that was kind of so that was my intro to dialysis. And that is scary.
Yes, I can. I mean, to not have any form of preparation or explanation, or even somebody going through you what dialysis is or the process of it, what to expect, and to be immediately thrust into then having the surgery to fit a line, which in of itself, I know, having experienced it myself, is very difficult. To then be, sent straight for dialysis is a lot to get your head around. So what were you going through? What were you thinking at this time?
I mean, I didn't like it, and obviously, and I suppose the thing in my head was, at this point, I'm like, the dialysis is meant to be temporary. So this is just a temporary measure to make sure that I don't kind of keel over from, another issue like high potassium, which at the time it's over 6. So they had to do it. But they're still going, we think your kidneys are going to recover, because in normal circumstances, they do with vasculitis, because the inflammation will go down. But as time went on, my odds dropped. And I remember saying to one of the consultants, kind of came to see me, and I said, I cannot do this long term. Like, I can't be in a position where I have to do this long term. And it's very emotional, but we'll talk about some of the other treatment that I was having at this point as well. But I was so whacked from everything that there wasn't a huge amount of room to think about anything apart from, staying alive.
It really infuriates me that time and time again, I'm hearing stories like yours, Cameron, where there isn't this proactive approach to care, where they prepare you for what could happen if things don't go well. So, okay, we start the treatment, and if the treatment goes well and your kidneys recover, that is the perfect scenario. However, if things don't go well and your kidneys don't recover, this is what could happen. You could have to have dialysis, and this is the process of dialysis. And so at least then, if things don't go well, you have some preparation. But because they don't do this proactively, then it then results in situations like yours where you get the call and then end up having dialysis with no form of preparation at all, which I think adds to trauma and makes the situation so much worse. And so for someone like yourself, where this has happened, for the doctors and the medical professionals that may be listening to this interview, what would you say to them in terms of, there's a patient in the future who might be in your position? What could you say to doctors in terms of what you would have liked to have known that would have helped you, that could potentially help patients in the future?
Yeah, it's a good question, that, and I think it's quite a hard one to answer. And I'm going to answer it in 2 ways, if that's okay. So, in a positive light, I would say that the care that I received was absolutely second to none. From a technical, practical, medical standpoint, it was unbelievable. Like, once I got to an acute stage of illness, it was, everything happened immediately. There was no waiting. There was no faffing around waiting to give me a bed. I was in, and it was life-saving treatment. So, that central line was put in very quickly, and I was in the dialysis room. Plasma exchange was ordered for me, 7 sessions, which came in 48 hours. That's a mega treatment that is administered within 48 hours. I'm on the best drugs that are out there for me. So that side of things, zero complaints. The one thing that I would say that I struggled with is, when you're in hospital, you lose the sense of being a human being to an extent, and you all of a sudden move from you're a number, and you're a patient, and you're a case, and that I think probably comes back to your point, and then it loses the human, like, empathy level around care. So you've got one side of things where the actual practical medical care being delivered is exceptional, but then because you're being treated, you've lost that kind of human element to being a person in there. I think that's where the kind of action and all that stuff is lost in the myriad of things that these guys have to do. And I don't know what the answer is. I don't have a silver bullet to say, I think everyone should just do this. But I think if there was more of an understanding that the people in there a lot of the time are, well, they're people, they're patients. They're not there out of choice. They're there because something awful has happened to them that was not their fault often. And if they were just dealt with a little bit more human empathy, maybe that would help, to your point, in terms of the explanations would come out more naturally, probably. So that's probably the main thing that I would say. I mean, I felt like after 2 weeks, I remember saying to my wife, I was like, I feel like I'm in prison. And that might sound like an odd thing to say because it's not in prison, but being in hospital for that amount of time isn't very nice. And although all the staff are really lovely and caring, I think it comes back to this point where you're all of a sudden treated like you're a number rather than, and that you lose your kind of sense of being a human being and you lose your sense of identity. And that's kind of why I associated it with prison, because that's what I imagined prison would be like. So look, it's a cultural point. It's not something that little old me is going to change overnight. But if I was a medical professional, well, my message to medical professionals listening to this would be, always remember that your patients, they are people. They're not cases. They're going through hell when they're on the hospital bed. You look to your consultants as sort of godlike figures when you're in there. So showing a bit more empathy, perhaps, than just another case to treat, I think would go a long way.
I 100% agree with that. Definitely. So starting dialysis then, how was that process for you?
I mean, I found it quite difficult, to be honest. I found it quite tight. I mean, physically, I found it tiring. I was weirdly like really hungry every time I finished the dialysis session, like ravenous. I always find it funny talking to other kidney patients about these little things that people have. So I'd eat like a horse when I finished. And yeah, I mean, it got to, so part of my attitude to life and generally is always to be I'm always quite positive, right? So it's obviously a massive change from where I was pre-illness. I don't know this is going to happen to me, and then it happens to me. I don't know anything about kidney disease, or none of my family have ever had it. I don't know anything about dialysis. So it's a new thing that I've got to come to terms with. And I kind of have battled with it over time. But when I kind of started, I remember after I've been discharged, I was then put on the 3 times a week, going to hospital 3 times a week for your dialysis. And I was like, right, okay, this is happening, whether I like it or not. And if I don't do it, that is not good for me. So I have to do it. And I remember sitting on the bed the first time and I was like, you've got 2 ways of dealing with this. You can either hate it and battle it. And this is what I'd been a bit like in the hospital. I've been fighting the nurses and I've not been nice to them, which they used to. Not like horrible, but, I was a bit, miserable. So you can fight it and hate it and all that stuff. Or you can go down the other route and go, isn't it amazing that I've got this solution that is essentially keeping me alive so I can go home and see my kids. So my mindset was the latter. So I was lying on that bed the first time when I'm in hospital, it's so chaotic, as I've said to you. I can't think from one thing to the next. But when I'm out and I've taken stock and I'm back in, I'm like, right, okay, I'm going to learn to live and appreciate what is happening to me. Not appreciate like I'm happy it's happened, but appreciate the fact that I've got this opportunity now. My life looks different, but it still looks like a life. So that's the attitude I took to it, which I think mentally helped me deal with it over time.
What you've just said is the embodiment of when I say the expression choose to live, because, like you said, you've got that fork in the road, whether you suffer through what you're going through or you embrace it and make the best of it. And so I really applaud you for taking that mindset, because it makes all the difference. And it really makes the difference between being defeated or being empowered. So I really celebrate you taking that stance.
Yeah, thanks.
So, in terms of your dialysis now, what does your week look like now on dialysis?
Yeah, so I actually switched because when you're hospital, as you know, in hospital dialysis is hemodialysis. So because I was an emergency case, there wasn't a time for me to choose between one or the other. Um, so after doing hemo for about 3 months, I had a second biopsy, second kidney biopsy. At this point, they wanted to check to see how whether they were knackered or not. Um, so they did the biopsy; they were knackered. Here we are. So then I got the choice of whether to choose what type of dialysis to do. So uh, I knew I was going to have to do dialysis for at least a year, because I need a year from diagnosis before I'm eligible to go on the transplant list. So I weighed everything up, and decided to go for peritoneal dialysis, which was a bit of a shift for me because at the time I was like, in my head, I didn't want anything sticking out of me. So I was like, oh, I get a fistula and I'll do hemo and then I'll just be more normal. But I went through it with the nurses and we were like, okay, well, let's do PD because I think, look, I'm not here to sell each option and say which one's better and which one's worse, right? For me, the idea of being able to do it overnight and it not interrupt my days and being able to travel fit kind of fit my lifestyle. So I opted for it. And that was another fork in the road, man. Like when I had that, like I remember having the PD catheter inserted, which is a pretty horrendous procedure, and then walking around with two things dangling out of my midriff and thinking I didn't want anything, and now I've got two things. But yeah, when I did that, like it was a big moment. Like after I'd done a couple of 2 weeks of doing the PD overnight, it was working fine. Then they took my central line out, which was a big like that for me was that was a major fork in the road for me. But I mean, in terms of like the actual dialysis, it's overnight. I do 8 hours, which sounds like a lot, but it's not when you're asleep. So I go to bed at 10, wake up at 6. It's relatively problem free. Like I travel. I was skiing last week in France. Took the machine with me. Um, I do get the drain pain, which I think everyone gets, which is kind of the annoying side effect from it. But apart from a bit of drain pain at 6 a.m. every morning, which is like an alarm clock, then I'm fine with it. Really, blood scores are all fine, as fine as they can be. Yeah, so it's all good dialysis wise for me at the moment.
Can definitely relate to that. And like you said, that fork in the road moment when you had your central line removed is the point where you're all in now, because you have to have PD and you don't have the backup of the central line. So was that like nerve wracking for you knowing that this was it now? Once they took that out, it was PD all the way.
I'd say it's always a bit nerve wracking. Uh, and I say to my wife quite a lot, like, there's so many firsts that you always have to do. So so doing the machine for the first time overnight and setting it all up, like took me about half an hour. And you're always worried about doing something wrong. Um, and then, the first night that we went away from home, I did the solo exchange bags, and I find that nerve-wracking because I've not done it before. So it's a new thing. And, we went abroad for the first time last week, and I found that nerve-wracking because, you're going away from your safety blanket of the hospital locally and your home, and doing all these new things for the first time with your new reality of dialysis is scary. And I think the further you get away from the your comfort blanket and the things that you're used to doing, the scarier things become. I mean, it's the same as like normal human nature, right? But you've got this thing that keeps you alive, and then you change that. It's like an emotion that I never knew that I had. That like survival instinct, but with something else that you need to take with you. It's quite unusual, actually. I can't really articulate it properly. You probably know what I mean, like with just me speaking about it, but to articulate it to the layman would be difficult.
I get it because, like, for me, I started on PD, and unfortunately, as everyone knows, it didn't work for me, and so I had to switch to HD. And the very first session, well, because I had to switch in an emergency, I had a chest line, and that first day that I switched to HD, I cried the whole day. I mean, literally the whole day, all the way through the session, all after the session. So I really understand what you're saying when you're saying about firsts and that comfort blanket going, and me knowing that I could no longer do PD and I had to switch to something new and switch to a new consultant and switch to a new team, and I wouldn't know anybody, and I'd have to go to a different place to do dialysis, and I couldn't do dialysis at home. So when you say about firsts and comfort blankets going, I 100% get it. I really do. And it is really difficult, but it's amazing how we adjust as kidney patients. We adjust, we take on board everything new, and we get through it. And it really goes to show, going back to what I said about being a kidney warrior, that's what being a kidney warrior, really is about: navigating those firsts, coming through the different challenges that we come through, and we keep going.
Do you know what as well I've found through all of this is it's amazing like what the human body is capable of coping with. Um, and it's really like it's really brought that to my sharp attention over the last few months, because like the things that used to annoy me, like my wife would leave like a bin bag by the back door and I'd get annoyed because she hadn't taken it out and it was me that had to take it out. And now the things that's not annoying. Like the things that are annoying now is like your PD circuit leaking in the night, and then you have to go into hospital at 6 in the morning to get precautionary antibiotics so you don't get peritonitis. And then these things that are they're quite major things that if you were just like, I'll say things like normal people, but if you were a person that didn't have, the same what we've got, like they don't understand this stuff and they would think that's extreme, but you kind of just become used to this stuff of being totally normal, and you become kind of uber resilient to the normal ongoings of the day, that perhaps you weren't before. So it's quite unusual. My point really is around like how resilient we are as human beings, and when to make like the amount of adversity we're able to cope with and still come out the other side. It's like quite extraordinary.
Absolutely. So where did the idea for running a marathon come from? Was there a specific moment, a conversation, or a thought you couldn't shake?
So I was a runner pre this. As I said, I was very active. I used to exercise 4 times a week, play football, run marathons and stuff. So it's not like running a marathon's not like a completely new thing for me. The motivation for it came. So when I was in hospital, one of my admissions, I ended up severely overloaded with fluid, life-threatening, 25 litres. I'm like a balloon, heart rate's through the roof, blood pressure sky high, and I mean sky high. And it got dialyzed out of me, and then I got wheeled back into the renal ward. And a nurse came over to me, and I was like, "It's got to stop happening." Like, I said to her, I was like, "I'm like a grenade. Like, I'm just keep exploding." And she was like, "Oh yeah, no, it's difficult to come to terms with. Your life's never going to be the same again." And I was like, in my head, I'm just like, it is. like, not to use any choice words, but I was like, it is going to be the same again. So there was I live in Shrewsbury, and they do a half marathon and a metric half marathon, which was last October. And I'd signed up to do the half marathon pre-illness, but I knew that was stupid. I knew that wasn't going to happen. So I said to myself, right, I'll do the metric half marathon, which is 13 kilometers. I'll easily be able to do that. So the 2 days after I had my central line removed, I ran the Shrewsbury metric half marathon.
We're going to pause there. In part 2, Cam shares what happened next as he prepares to run a marathon and attempt a world record, and a moment that really stayed with me. Part 2 is available right now, so make sure you watch it next. And if Cam's story has touched you today, please do share it, because someone out there needs to hear this. Until then, take care and choose to live.
Diary of a Kidney Warrior podcast in partnership with Kidney Care UK, sharing faith, knowledge, hope, and love.